welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. This is TJ, your host. Tonight is a viewer question, a rather interesting question. It comes from Step Chicklin, which I will read. I've been wondering about this concept that narcs lack empathy, that it is the definition of their disorder, and often described as empty shells, etc. Conversely, empaths are described as the opposite and possibly likened to a sponge absorbing other people's emotions. It seems, therefore, that empaths and narcs both share a lack of a sense of self, though empaths can genuinely share emotion, whereas a narc is incapable of it. My question is, would it be more accurate to describe narcs as lacking an emotional mind instead of just lacking empathy? Any comments? So to tackle this particular interesting question, I figured I'd start off by clarifying, because it does state that lack of empathy is the definition of their disorder, but I've consulted the DSM-5 criteria to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, and it does have more to it than simply lacking of empathy. For example, the official criteria, which I realize changes over time, so it's nothing set in stone, but it's a guide. Having an exaggerated sense of self-importance, expecting to be recognized as superior even without achievements that warrant such a thing, exaggerating your achievements and talents, being preoccupied with fantasies about success and power and brilliance and beauty and of having the perfect mate, believing that you are superior and can only be understood by or associate with equally special people, requiring constant admiration, having a sense of entitlement, expecting special favors and unquestioning compliance with your expectations, taking advantage of others to get what you want, having an inability or unwillingness to recognize the needs and feelings of others. There you go, with lack of empathy. Being envious of others and believing also that others are envious of you, and then behaving in an arrogant or haughty manner. They state that although some features of it's not the same, narcissistic personality disorder crosses the border of healthy confidence into thinking so highly of yourself, NPD may seem like having confidence that you put yourself on a pedestal and value yourself more than you value others. Now, on to the definition of empath. What's an empath? Well, I found an article, Dr. Judith Orloff's blog, How to Know If You Are an Empath. She states that empaths are highly sensitive, finely tuned instruments when it comes to emotions. They feel everything, sometimes to an extreme, and they're less apt to intellectualize feelings. Intuition is the filter through which they experience the world. Empaths are naturally giving, spiritually attuned, and very good listeners. If you want heart, the empath has got it. Through thick and thin, they are there for you, world-class nurturers. She states also the trademark of empaths is that they know where you're coming from. Some can do this without taking on others' feelings. However, others, for better or for worse, like this author, she claims, and many of her patients, they can become angst-sucking sponges, which is interesting because that word was in the question from Step Chicklin. This often overrides the sublime capacity to absorb positive emotions and all that is beautiful. If empaths are around peace and love, their bodies assimilate these and they can flourish. Negativity, though, often feels assaultive, exhausting. Thus, they are particularly easy marks for emotional vampires whose fear or rage can ravage empaths, which I would say cluster B narcissist monsters. As a subconscious, or I'd say an unconscious defense, they may gain weight as a buffer. When thin, they're more vulnerable to negativity, An empath's sensitivity can be overwhelming in romantic relationships. Many stay single since they haven't learned to negotiate their special cohabitation needs with a partner. Empaths absorb the impact of a stressful emotion. It can trigger panic attacks, depression, food and sex drug binges, a plethora of physical symptoms that defy traditional medical diagnosis, from fatigue to agoraphobia, which is being terrified of leaving your home in fear you'll lose control out somewhere in public. She states, empathy doesn't have to make you feel too much all the time. Empathy continues to make her feel freer, igniting her compassion, vitality, and sense of the miraculous. Then she gives us a quiz to determine if you are an empath. Ask yourself, have I been labeled as too emotional, overly sensitive? If a friend is distraught, do I start feeling it too? Are my feelings easily hurt? Am I emotionally drained by crowds? Do I require time alone to revive? Do my nerves get frayed by noise, smells, or excessive talk? Do I prefer taking my own car places so that I can leave when I please? Do I overeat to cope with emotional stress? Am I afraid of becoming engulfed by intimate relationships? She claims if you answer yes to 1 to 3 of those, you're at least a partial empath. Responding yes to more than 3 indicates you've found your emotional type. Recognizing you're an empath is the first step to taking charge of your emotions instead of constantly drowning in them. Staying on top of empathy will improve your self-care and relationships. So now back to the viewer question. As far as the narcissist, we've established that lacking of empathy is not the only thing that makes the narcissist a narcissist. However, we can focus in on that aspect of them in the spirit of this question. Yes, they are empty shells. They don't have the ability to experience things that others do, and I know that they watch others who are experiencing things that they'll never experience, and they probably look at it in a puzzled way and take note of what the people say. So then if they want to appear to be someone that has empathy and feelings, they will recite whatever they've memorized. But yes, they are pretty much an empty shell. They're like a person in development in childhood. When you're supposed to be connecting with your own emotions and your own self, they, for some reason, are taught to put those needs aside because there's somebody else that needs to be taken care of, and somebody else doesn't want to hear, let's say when they're very young and they have a pain somewhere and they say, Mommy, I've got a pain here. Mommy might say, oh, I don't want to hear about that. Eventually the child learns to not tell Mommy about the pain and to keep it inside, which I believe from my studies that creates problems because it's still there. You can bury it deep inside, but it's still there, and it probably comes out, if you don't express it openly, in other ways, in horrifying behaviors. But then when we go back to the empaths, which are that sponge, I'm not quite sure that an empath has a lack of sense of self. I think that an empath can have a sense of self and also take on the emotions of others. However, if we cross over into the word that used to be codependent, which I don't know if it still is, I think it has a new name, with that, it's a different story. And even with the empath, from my understanding, it's possible for the empath to forget their own situations because they're too concerned about the situations of another. They're too overwhelmed in someone else's emotions. So I can get where this question's coming from, because in that respect, it's like the extreme empath is not concerned with their own needs. They're listening to whomever's crying to them or whoever's having other issues. So they're busy taking on that other person's emotions, but at the same time, if that other person was not there, I think that the empath would still have a sense of self. It's just if they're put into situations with others who are having great happiness or horrifying horror times, they can get sucked up into it, and that can cause them to abandon themselves. But I think if they're outside of such influences, empaths are fine. They are familiar with who they are, and because of that, that's one of the key requirements for empathy anyway, is to know yourself, what you like, what you don't like, what you feel with this and what you feel with that. That way when you see somebody else going through a similar situation, you can liken it to your own experience So I think the empath is in a little better position than the narcopath or narcissist, but the sick part is, as we saw in that article, many times the two are pulled towards each other. The toxic monster who doesn't have any empathy but pretends, and then there's the empath who does feel emotion and is in touch with feelings and emotions and wants to take on the feelings and emotions of the other person. Problem is, if they're a narcissist, they don't have anything that the empath can latch onto because it's all covered up. It's all faked. It's all pretend. Like when I was reading about the empath, it made me think of a few cluster B monsters I've been involved with in the past who it almost seems like maybe they took a page out of that article about what an empath is, and when they do their fake mask routine, they will pretend like they have those qualities, which they think that, well, I'd rather pretend to be someone who cares so much about everybody else's feelings than show people that I'm really a heartless, evil to the core monster that only cares about myself. So they try to take on the role of an empath. But if you know what that's like, and then you're with someone like that long enough, eventually you can start to see that it doesn't match up. Problem is, they're usually covert, so you won't see it right out in the open. It's something you come to a conclusion about after experiencing several things, because these covert narcissist people are very sneaky. They're cowards. They don't want to do anything right in front of you that's bad. No, they want to present the best image of themselves to you in public when you're around them. Another thing I've picked up on is that they want to simply appear to be what they think you want them to be, never mind actually being it. And that's where the confusion occurs, because let's say you're a really honest and loyal person and you meet one of these narcopath toxic monsters who can tell, ooh, this person's that way. Oh, I'm very loyal. I'm very trustworthy. And they'll say those words, but then over the course of time, you'll notice 10 times when something was kept from you that you should have known. You'll notice 10 other times when something it did to someone else doesn't indicate that they're loyal. Like, that I'm not talking to my uncle anymore because of this one little disagreement. I'm not talking to them. And then maybe another friend or relative, I'm not talking to them. You're like, wait a second, okay. You're a loyal person, but then you're tossing aside family members, and it doesn't fit. That's where the cognitive dissonance comes in, where you start to realize after exposure with these fools for long enough that they're fake. They want to give the appearance of being loyal, of being honest, or whatever they're trying to be. So they do lack a sense of self in a way, but on the other hand, I think they have a sense of self. It's just not something they could ever share with the public and expect a positive response. So they learn to live in shame by hiding what they are, and when they come across an empath, they suck in and take over and try to pretend to be just like that empath. The thing is, they get it wrong because they're faking it. And that's easy to see. Like, I've noticed that with a few where they claim to be this certain way, but then I look at the whole picture and think, you're not that way at all. And then, of course, if you say that to them, oh, don't you dare, because they will attack you. They're basically putting on an act. They're wearing a mask for you, and they've designed it especially for you. And if you start to realize it for what it is, that causes or creates a narcissistic injury. Face it, when they're with you, the mask they're wearing is all they have. A lot of their statements are like all-encompassing, like, oh, I'm always a loyal person, I'm always an honest person. Well, there's no room for the other parts of their lives they're keeping from you. So if you start to notice other pieces of their lives, like, wait a second, you're always honest, but didn't you lie to your mother about that one thing that happened? Wait a second, didn't you cover up for your sister about that thing that happened? Where's the honesty in that? And they will come back to you. Oh, I only lied to her because of this. Oh, I only lied to them because of that. Oh, and it's just sick. It's clearly not. They're fake. They don't understand. They can't do it. But anyway, we're getting off subject. As far as the two types, I think they attract each other, but usually the narcissist is fake, so the empath thinks they're meeting a real person, but eventually the real empath can detect that the narcissist is a phony. As far as more accurate to describe the narcissist as lacking an emotional mind, I would say yes. I would say they lack an emotional ability, not just a mind. They, remember, abandon their own feelings. They've learned to shut those off from probably something traumatic in childhood. And the problem is, when you're a child, that's when you're developing as a person. So if you're in a childhood where you're constantly shoving your own feelings aside in order to take care of another parent or a relative or a sister or brother, you won't have any sense of self, because you may have a piece here, a piece there that comes up, but I would imagine you would just shove it to the side because you got things to do. It just becomes habit, and then by the time these people reach adulthood, it's like there's a whole part of them that never got developed, which is why they say that the narcissist is basically a child in an adult body. So they have the desire to sneak around and get away with things and not get caught, and if they do get caught, give you stupid reasons and excuses why, and you, being a fully functional, empathetic adult, will think, that's not a valid reason for doing that. They will try to convince you otherwise. But yes, they're incapable of knowing what it feels like to be a person who's in touch with themselves. In actuality, they can never really feel what you're feeling. They can just look at you as if you've got something they want. So they're going to switch gears and put this mask on or that mask on in order to try to get that for themselves. The thing is, it's all a fake act. It's never going to last. They cannot sustain anything for a long term, because they're not real. They're not capable of appreciating themselves, so there's no way they're going to appreciate you or another person, but they know how to pretend. And I think they do gather that knowledge from each target that they victimize and destroy or try to destroy. They listen to the words that the target says, and they jot those down or memorize them. And it's kind of funny sometimes, because they try to use them in later relationships, and if you're a person who's fully developed and you hear that, you think something's off here. What you're saying sounds nice, but it doesn't fit you. And then they'll attack you for saying, don't you try to tell me what I am. So good luck. It's very accurate to state narcissists lack an emotional sense of self. They are just pretenders. They just fake it. And I used to talk to at least two. I'd tell them, it's like, well, yeah, you can fake your way through and maybe get somebody who, if they knew what you really were, would never give you a second thought, that you might get some dates with them or something. It's only a matter of time before they realize that you're not really that way. You're living on borrowed time. I mean, you're having fun with them now, but for these people, though, they have this supply need. That's okay if this one doesn't work out, because they've got another one over there that they're starting up with, and two others over here. So, sure. My point was, well, you're never going to have anything that's lasting or significant, because it's all based in fakery. As I read in a book at one point, important lesson for you all, a relationship that's built with dishonesty and lies is a relationship that's built on sand. What does that mean? It means that if I meet you and you've got $1 million in your bank account and I know it and I want it, that I'm some nasty, horrible, lying, evil, murderer person, and you're not, I'll be like, oh, I love your face and your hair. Oh, you're so beautiful. I'm a wonderful person. Well, if I do that, and in reality I know that I'm a criminal, and I hear you talk about your experiences with criminals and how you disposed of them, I'm going to feel a guilty pleasure if you're giving me a second chance for a date. But the problem is, we're building this relationship on lies. I'm telling you that, oh, I would never be dishonest or steal from anyone. Oh, I couldn't do that. And that is phony. So let's say we do date. Let's say you fall for me and you believe me for a while. The point is, this relationship is doomed because it's all based on fakery. You think that I'm all these things I'm saying, and I'm really a thief wanting to take your money. Let's say I do take your money, or I take a bit of it. Eventually, you're going to figure it out, and guess what? All that victory is hollow. That house, built on sand, is going to crumble and sink down into it, maybe even into quicksand.
I am the narcopath. So in case you're dense, the narcopath hates to be scammed. Now I can do the scams, Nobody else is going to do it to me. They're going to pay. I don't like censorship, nor do I think that any of the content that I could ever possibly place on a platform such as YouTube could be anything near as racy as those shows on television with profanity and sex and violence and everything else on that goddamn list that we covered that YouTube is claiming makes things not advertiser friendly. Well, honey, if that's true, then I would expect to see Mary Poppins on television all day and all night, and nothing else, because anything else is not advertiser friendly. So, this is a revolution.
Being so particular about what is acceptable and what isn't. Honey, did YouTube turn into a child station? Is it for kids only with nothing objectionable? That could be reserved for kids too.
Fact is, I'm not buying it. I think it's a cover for something else. Probably a discrimination effort because already talking about that other stuff they're gonna do with making my friend Sandy Hoaxtard's newscast conveniently just not searchable. That's BS too. This is censorship. We're in 1984. Sex crime! This is disgusting, and something has to be done. No, we're not asking for help from our government. Please, they're the ones that are in on this trash. We've got to think of something else. Any ideas?
So I might as well tell you. I did all that on purpose. I pretended to be into every single thing you were into. I did everything I could to help you whenever you needed it. The reason for all that was, I knew eventually you'd figure out the kind of gal I am. And I had to rack those things up, so when you told me that you thought you didn't want to see me anymore, I could throw them all back in your face and say,
Are you kidding? After I repaired your car windshield, you're just going to dump me over this one little lie? Oh, you heartless, horrible person. And I was playing victim, and it worked a few times now, didn't it? Not always, but I know my craft. Because honestly, I know you'd sit and think to yourself, she's right. She did do all these things, and here I am discarding her because of one little lie. So, that's one of them.
in case you didn't know, I am the narcopath, and you ain't. So don't even try.